Putin's 2008 invasion of Georgia, the 2014 annexation of Crimea, and the ongoing war in Ukraine have outraged the world community and his population. He is losing power and civil conflict is looming, threatening the empire he built. This scenario mirrors history, asking the question, can Putin sustain his authority in a country turning against him? Kursk Oblast catalyst. Empire collapse requires a catalyst. That catalyst was Ukraine's August 6, 2024 invasion of Kursk Oblast, which nobody expected. Interestingly, Ukraine didn't report the Kursk invasion first. No big promises were made to take Russian territory. The Russian military ministry said that 300 Ukrainian forces crossed the border into Kursk at 8 a.m. on August 6th. A few tanks and armored vehicles escorted those soldiers, who wore blue tape across their arms to identify them from their attackers. The few dozen Russian border guards, many of whom were teenage conscripts with no military experience, surrendered to the Ukrainians at border posts in the opening offensive. Russia said it thwarted the attempt. The opposite was true. Within a day of the invasion, Ukrainian armored vehicles raced towards Sudza, 9 kilometers behind the front lines. On the third day, Ukrainian soldiers entered Kurovino, a small settlement 20 kilometers inside the border. Increased gains ensued. Ukraine advanced, capturing villages. Ukraine took Sudza 10 days into the invasion and used it as a command hub for subsequent attacks. Putin pledged to respond to the invasion well. That response awaits. In the first week and a half of the Kursk invasion, Russia had to evacuate roughly 2,000 civilians as Putin scrambled to withdraw some of his 500 troops from Ukraine to defend against them. By the end of August, when this film was scripted, Ukraine claimed almost 1,295 square kilometers of Russian territory in Kursk. General Oleksandr Syrsky, Ukraine's top military commander, said the operation has seized 594 Russian prisoners. The LA Times reports that the seized region is about the size of Los Angeles. Further BBC reports suggest that Ukraine controls roughly 100 Russian villages within the 1,295 square kilometers, each of which can be reinforced against a Russian counterattack. Putin's image falls. Putin was humiliated throughout the invasion. He played the role of Russia's strongman throughout the conflict, as many Russian leaders have done before him. Strong, decisive, and able to act. Putin wanted to project an invincible Russia, and he succeeded in doing so. He may argue that the Ukraine war wouldn't affect the typical Russian. No battle would reach Russia. It would all happen in Ukraine. Kursk disproved that. What prompted Ukraine to invade Kursk? It doesn't plan to annex the territory like Putin annexed Crimea in 2014. Forbes reports that Ukraine plans to send 15,000 soldiers and 2 air assault brigades to Kursk, but they aren't tasked with transferring control. The Ukrainian attack on Kursk does not signal the start of a wider invasion that will destroy Putin's empire. Zelensky's goals are more complicated. One theory is that Kursk was invaded to distract. Ukraine hopes forcing Russia to move soldiers to Kursk will ease pressure on the besieged Donbas region, where Putin has focused most of his 2024 strikes and where Russia is progressively gaining land. Forbes reports that Putin's eastern operation in Ukraine intends to divert Russian troops away from Pokrovsk, which Zelensky may have intended to do. If so, the invasion may have failed as a diversion. Forbes reported on August 28th that Russia has conquered Novorodivka, an 8-kilometer from Pokrovsk Ukrainian settlement. Putin is expected to launch another onslaught, and Ukraine's army commitment to Kursk may make it less prepared to defend. More plausible are Harvard University Ukrainian Research Institution fellow Paul Danieri's other objectives. At the University of California, Riverside, he says it's unclear how the Kursk incursion would affect major Ukraine military battles. However, it has various uses. He argues the invasion's initial success boosts Ukrainian morale and causes Putin and his military chiefs political problems. Kursk could cause Russia's collapse. The latter issue is crucial to why Kursk could bring down modern Russia. According to Danieri, Putin appeared on Russian television to humiliate his military officers in front of the public. He wanted to maintain his strongman image, which made him a successful Russian leader. The Kursk assault shattered Russia's invincibility, which is the problem. Putin's military leaders were humiliated while Ukraine was expanding and hundreds of Russians were evacuated. Putin could no longer claim to safeguard Russia. Dressing down his military chiefs in public may also be a mistake. It begs the question of why those leaders were appointed, if they allowed a Ukrainian invasion. Putin cannot be questioned openly, but many Russians may be doubting his decision-making abilities. The Kursk invasion's true motive may be revealed there. Zelensky probably understands Ukraine can't keep Kursk indefinitely. Russia will counterattack. On August 28th, Putin will launch a counteroffensive to recapture that land, according to Deputy CIA Director David Cohen. He understands Russia will struggle, especially because Putin's sluggish response has allowed Ukraine to create defensive lines. But the counterattack is coming. The response may be too late for Putin. Ukraine has achieved one of its main goals of undermining Russia's military chief. The Russian military and its leader lost their strongman image. If all goes well for Ukraine, the Kursk invasion will finish the war and Putin's career. Could the Kursk invasion start a Russian civil war? That raises an obvious question. How? How may the Kursk invasion cause a civil war in Russia or collapse Putin's empire? The answer begins with what we've mentioned. The Kursk invasion shows Putin's military errors. Putin's focus on the eastern offensive in 2024 has prevented him from strengthening Russia's northern boundaries with Ukraine. That allowed Ukraine's army to simply pass Russia's border posts on August 6th. Putin sent recent Russian conscripts to the checkpoints, none of whom could fight the Ukrainian forces. Even worse, retired Russian General Andrei Guralev, a lower house parliamentarian, says the border soldiers had no intelligence. He said on Telegram that the border guards lacked intelligence. Nobody loves truthful information. Everyone wants to hear pleasant things. The truth in reporting. Those 4 sentences underscore the fact that many Russians, including some politicians, know state-owned media channels are biased toward Putin. Russia's leader isn't informing his people about Kursk, but he's failing to hide it. After all, they can see the proof. Kursk residents are being evacuated after Russia lost territory. All of this is due to Putin's military blunders, including failing to control the Kursk border and not providing his forces with intelligence. Putin misjudged General Alexander Syrsky again. Syrsky, now Ukraine's top military general, led Ukraine's soldiers in Kharkiv in 2022 to a win over Russian invaders that helped Russia fail to secure Kiev in the early stages of the conflict. Syrsky, known as Snow Leopard, succeeded General Valery Zelensky in early 2024. Putin's miscalculation was expecting Syrsky would assault Russian forces like his predecessor. Zelensky organized a 2023 Ukrainian counteroffensive against Russia. That counteroffensive failed because it was so well known, giving Russia time to set up defenses to keep the land Ukraine wanted to recapture. Putin seemed like a military genius to his people after organizing Russia's forces to withstand Ukraine's largest onslaught. Putin's triumph derived from Zelensky's failures, but Syrsky was a different animal. Some Ukrainians call Ukraine's new military head the Butcher, while Sky News calls him an obsessive planner with iron discipline. He prefers quiet, accurate attacks against his foes to publicized ones. This was evident in his 2014 response to a Putin-backed insurgency in eastern Ukraine, when Russian security officer Dmitry Medvedev compared him to a snow leopard. So warning signs existed. Syrsky would plan a well-organized attack that would not require body throwing. Small, accurate, distributed strokes. In Kursk, Ukraine's military used smaller groupings to launch tactical strikes on their Russian opponents. Putin should have known everything about Syrsky. He'd witnessed Syrsky's tactics on the battlefield, but he misjudged the Ukrainian military leader and Ukraine's potential to capture Russian land. Putin resembles his Soviet forebears here. Did Russia underestimate its opponents again? After all, Russia often underestimates its opponents. Russian forces entered Afghanistan in the 1980s with the hope of quickly defeating the rebels and establishing Soviet control. The Soviet Union collapsed. It became embroiled in a decade-long battle that killed 15,000 Soviet soldiers. Russian withdrawal was forced. Bruce Riedel, who worked on the CIA's Afghan rebel aid scheme, said Putin underestimated the Ukrainians today, like the Soviet Union underestimated Afghanistan. Milton Bearden, another Afghanistan war CIA operative, says it more bluntly. Putin may be repeating history by reversing it. Repeating patterns appear. The Ukraine war, which was supposed to end in weeks, has become a quagmire like Afghanistan in the 1980s. This time, the quagmire is killing more Russians. Ukraine's Ministry of Finance and others report 612390. The Washington Post claims that Russia's campaign in Afghanistan ended the Cold Campaign and fell the USSR. Putin and today's Russia may be pursuing the same path by underestimating his Ukrainian enemy. Putin has weakened himself in other ways besides underestimating his enemy. He failed to protect the Russian people many times, including the Kursk invasion. The Conversation reported in late August 2024 that Kursk is the next crack in Putin's protective image. Drone assaults by Ukraine have hit various Russian cities, including Moscow, during the Ukraine war. The Putin Regime. Putin's mishandling of the Kursk invasion may be the final blow to his leadership, echoing the Soviet Union's fall due to mass public protests like the 1991 Minsk and 1989 Baltic state protests. Putin's failure to protect his people could lead to widespread dissatisfaction. The public's growing anger is evident as Putin faces mounting opposition. In an August 2024 interview with The Guardian, Lyubov Antipova, from the Kursk village of Zaushenka, shared how she urged her elderly parents to flee after hearing reports of the invasion. Her parents dismissed the threat, believing Putin's regime would prevent any danger. However, Ukrainian troops advanced swiftly, surprising Kursk residents. Alexander Zorin, a local museum curator, claimed official reports downplayed the situation, describing the invaders as a small group of saboteurs. Despite this, about 2,000 people were evacuated from the city, including Zorin. Russian anger over Putin's response grew, with a Ukrainian soldier named Wolverine telling CBC that many residents were furious with the government's failure to evacuate and the cutting off of essential services. A video showed a Russian citizen lamenting abandonment, though naming Putin was too risky. This lack of protection, compounded by disinformation, reflects the same failure seen during the Soviet era, with many in Kursk unprepared for the invasion. Putin's inability to safeguard his people has led to a significant loss of public support, adding to his growing problems. In conclusion, Putin's obsession with restoring the Russian Empire has destroyed him. His moves to consolidate power have incited dissatisfaction and destabilized his regime. As Russia faces social unrest, the issue is, will Putin survive or will history repeat itself and terminate his reign? The future is uncertain, but his kingdom is dissolving internally.